My name is Catherine Feore. I'm the Vice President Marketing and a Director with Adroit Resources. Adroit Resources is a TSXV and FSE listed junior company. We have properties in Canada and Italy, and those properties are 100% owned. Today I'm going to be focusing on our Italian properties and the strategic metal that is antimony. We have approximately 45,000 tonnes in historic resources that we want to make compliant with the 43101 instrument. Antimony is a very widely spread, widely used industrial metal. It's used in plastics, it's used to make flame retardants. You find it in some very key emerging technologies, iPads, semiconductors, photovoltaic cells. So there is a very strong demand and need for the metal. But there's also a growing problem with supply. China currently dominates the market with over 90% of world production. At the end of 2010, quantitative restrictions were introduced and import subsidies were introduced for this metal in 2011. More recently, the British Geological Survey have placed this at their highest risk list. So I'll be talking about antimony and why I believe and why the British Geological Survey believe it is one of the elements that it is greatest risk.
One reason that I like to come to the Objective Capital conferences is that I personally get exposed to topics that I wouldn't normally hear when I'm in Canada. I just came back from Adroit Resources presentation given by Catherine Feore on antimony. And one thing that was quite intriguing is the similarities between the antimony market and the rare earths. Similar volumes sold globally, and the fact that China to date has a lock on those materials but is starting to run out of them, so that there is a focus now on developing antimony resources outside of China. And for me it was interesting because I didn't know much about antimony, so it was very, very enlightening to hear Catherine's talk.
Can I just draw your attention to this first slide? This is a picture of mining in Italy. Now, we have a great deal of difficulty persuading investors that you are allowed to mine in Italy. This is Grosseto province. There are 577 working mines and there are 38 geothermal power stations. So can I assure you that you are allowed to dig a hole in the ground in Italy? This is just a disclaimer to cover forward-looking statements about what we think or what we estimate is going to happen for Adroit over the next couple of years. I'm going to cover the capital structure of Adroit, our two flagship assets. I'm going to concentrate on our Italian properties because those are the ones that have our historic antimony resource. Look a bit at the antimony business. Look at a bit more detail at the Italian properties. Probably won't be covering the Canadian properties, but that's in the presentation, and I'll move on to the management. This is the capital structure as of the 29th of February. I'd just like to draw your attention to the insider holdings. 12% of our shares are held by insiders. As you can see, like many other resource companies, we suffered a good deal at the beginning of 2010. These are our two flagship assets. Our first asset, the one I'm concentrating on, is our former recently producing major antimony mine in Grosseto province. And as you can see also on the slide, we have our Red Vein property. This is a highly prospective area in northern Ontario, in the Shining Tree Camp, very underexplored, and in the very famous Abitibi Greenstone Belt, which is very well known for the Timmins Camp and the Sudbury mining camps, as well as Kirkland Lake, among others. So our current exploration program is preparation for drilling of historic antimony resources. And we've just finished our winter drilling program on our Red Vein property, and we'll be processing assay results over the next few weeks and press releasing that, hopefully in the near future. Coming to antimony, very often I meet people who know very little about antimony. It's not one of those metals that's very well understood. And I think it's because it's used in very, very small quantities. For example, one of its major uses is in flame retardants. It's absolutely critical as part of in making flame retardants, but it's a very, very small part. Flame retardants, you find them everywhere. They're in all forms of transport, cars, boats, airplanes, and it's in protective clothing, especially in all children's clothing. It's used in foams and materials and insulation in buildings, in all electric cabling, and in the plastic casing of many of your computers. So it's a regulatory obligation. There is no adequate substitute for it, and because it's so widely dissipated, it's very, very difficult to recycle from this source. Antimony is also used in the making of polyethylene terephthalate. Right. This is my prop. If any of you have got a plastic bottle, can I suggest that you look at the bottom and you'll see that triangle system for PET, polyethylene terephthalate. It's used in a lot of plastic packaging, but also to make polyester. This is a market that's growing year on year, particularly in Southeast Asia. Again, there is no adequate substitute. And again, it is very, very widely dissipated. So it's difficult, it's not economic to recycle from this source. There are many other uses. One of its well-known uses is in lead-acid batteries for hardening lead. This is an important source because it only accounts for 4% of the market. But that is about the only source where you can really economically recycle antimony from. The other sources, like I said, it's not terribly economic because of its used in such small amounts. It's also used in ammunition because it's a metal that contracts on heating. Antimony tin oxide is used in photovoltaic cells, semiconductors. It's got very special properties. If anybody in this room has got an iPad and a touch screen, that's probably does have antimony in it. It's because it's used in all sorts of transparent conducting materials. It's used in OLED screens, LED screens. I could go on. This is just an overview of many of its uses. I haven't even touched on ceramics and glass and in pigments, where it's also used. So I hope that gives you a picture of its widespread use and the demand for the metal. Moving on to production. As you can see, China very clearly dominates world production at this moment, with over 90% of production. If you look at the other players, Bolivia, Russia, Tajikistan, South Africa, none of these countries produce more than around 3,500 tonnes of metal a year. We're hoping to take our historic resource of 45,000 tonnes of metal, make that 43101 compliant to meet Canadian standards, and raise that resource to over 100,000 tonnes. We're very confident that we can do this. We estimate that this would give us a 10-year mine producing 10,000 tonnes a year, very roughly. As you can see, that would make Italy the biggest producer of antimony after China and be as much as Russia, Bolivia, South Africa put together. We have an even more ambitious target of 200,000 tonnes. That's an internal target. As I said, we're confident we can reach 100,000, and I'll come to the reasons why I think we might be able to go a good deal higher than that. But just a little more about the supply. Chinese production has been decreasing year on year. 50% of that production comes from the Twinkling Star Company in Hunan province. Recently, the US Geological Survey did a report on antimony. And in that report, they say that Hunan will run out of its antimony reserve in the next 5 years. This is 60% of the Chinese production. We anticipate that that was going to have a very large impact on the market and on the price of antimony. Like rare earth metals and tungsten, the Chinese introduced export restrictions and quantitative limits at the end of 2010. Rare earths stole the headlines. I wish we had been called rare antimony, but anyhow. We've also seen a lot of additional capacity being bought. There's Beaverbrook, which is the only producing mine in North America. It was bought by Henan Non-Ferrous Metals in 2009. That was subsequently bought by 51% by China's Mid-Metals Corporation. Recently, at a meeting in Brussels, Andrew Wang, the head of their marketing, said that he anticipates that China's entire reserve will run out within the next 10 years. Another interesting producer is Anchor Resources. Anchor Resources did a resource calculation, an Australian one, in York, in the beginning of 2010, and received an immediate cash takeover bid at almost twice their share price. Again, that was a Chinese company who bought Anchor. So, as I said, there's no effective substitute, and because of low recycling due to the dissipative nature, we believe that supply is going to be further constrained in the coming years. On the demand side, China has introduced import subsidies at the beginning of 2011. The EU, as well, in 2009 did a report. They looked at 34 essential materials for EU manufacturing. Of those 34 materials, they made a critical list, and there were 14 materials there, and one of which, of course, was antimony. The US and the EU are currently 100% dependent on imports, and the British Geological Survey did a report in September of last year assessing 55 elements. They had various categories, but in the very highest risk category, ahead of rare earth elements, they placed antimony. This is what's been happening to the price of antimony over recent years. As you can see, it reached a $7,000 a tonne high, which has corrected down to $12,300 more recently. For the reasons I've given, we forecast that the price will rise again. Difficult to find comparator companies for this resource or who are for antimony-only plays. Most producers also have interests in gold and silver and other metals because it is found with other metals very often. But one comparison that can be done is TriStar Resources, which is at a very early stage. It's listed on AIM. It's explorations that's based on intermittent artisanal mining, and I think they've come up with good results. But again, like I said, early stage resource and early stage exploration and a market cap of 55 million. We have a historic resource of 45,000 tonnes and near a former high-grade mine. So we think that we are undervalued at this moment. And that's on our Italian properties alone. So these are the 6 permits that we've worked on, done our exploration work on so far. The top 2 are very prospective for gold. The Isalioli, Monticchio, Scritto and Pietricci, these are the most prospective for antimony and contain the highest amount of historical resources. This is a former high-producing area. Manciano used to be one of the biggest producers, and some of our resources are from drilling that was carried out in 81 and 82 by the mine itself. Now, This was done in order to continue the life of the mine. But what had happened to antimony prices at that time was that they had gone down a lot and it wasn't economical to continue. This is in the 80s. In the 80s and the 90s, China quadrupled their production of antimony. It's difficult for us to think of it now when they've got a trade surplus of 3.3 trillion, but in the 80s and 90s that wasn't the case. And they needed foreign currency reserves. So they quadrupled production, bringing in about $200 million a year in the 90s, and in the noughties bringing in about $500 million a year. Obviously, that situation has completely turned on its head. China needs these resources, and they're going to be reluctant to relinquish them. That's the export restrictions. As I've said, our objective is to recommence mining. In this last slide you see, this is a mine shaft on our East Salioli property. There's a lot of mining that has happened on each of these properties. We also have a picture of the antimony at surface. I should also say that this is very much at surface. You don't have to go down, our historic resources go down 35 metres. And 50. I think the biggest drill was went down about 51 metres. So we have 45,000 tonnes of contained metal nut ore in historic resources that we want to make compliant with National Instrument 43-101, and we plan to increase this to over 100,000 tonnes of mineable antimony. We're going to do this in two ways: continued exploration on open antimony deposits that we currently hold, and also to expand our antimony resources by acquiring other properties known or thought to contain antimony resources. So I've said that we're confident that we can meet this target of over 100,000 tonnes. The work that we carried out during this summer and fall indicated, just on 2 properties alone, that we have extensive mineralisation throughout these permits. We believe that on these properties alone we could reach our target of 100,000 tonnes. The pink dots indicate about 2% antimony. So that's very much at surface. We've also requested 3 further permits. Salvena, Catabio and Valle Lupara. These areas have got either mines or historic resources on them, or they've got very clear mineralisation at surface that we've looked at and we think it's worth exploring. So by exploring the current permits and extending onto new permits, we believe that the target of 100,000 tonnes is more than realistic. And we believe that, and we have an internal target of 200,000 tonnes. I won't say much about our Canadian properties because we're talking about strategic metals today. I'll just give you a little glimpse, time allowing. This is the Shining Tree Camp. It's one of the most underexplored areas of Northern Ontario. That's because there was a land caution on it from 1970 to 1995. I visited this property with geologists from Timmins and asked them, I'm sorry, why has nobody explored here before? We're just south of Timmins, north of Sudbury. We're in the most prolific mining area in the world. Why? I can't believe that we're the first people to think of this. And it was because you weren't allowed to do exploration between 1970 and 1995 in this area. That limitation has been lifted, and the government is actually encouraging exploration. And there's been a lot of discoveries recently in the area surrounding our property. We also had a recent 43-101 carried out in this property. Our Mark Vetico, our geologist, wrote in this report that we have an inferred McIntyre-Hollinger Canarium type geological model. I don't know if any of you know the Hollinger mine, the McIntyre mine, but it produced more than 35 million ounces of gold, 7 million ounces of silver, and over 100,000 tonnes of copper in a very long mine life, as you can see there, 1912 to 1988. There's some comparators. I won't go through that because I don't think we've got time. Just an overview of our directors, officers and consultants. And I'd just like to go straight to the technical management. As you can see, we've got a wholly owned subsidiary, Risorse di Minerali Naturali. We set this up last year because it makes it much, much easier to do business in Italy by having a wholly owned company within Italian law. And we have Davide Francescoli, geologist, managing this office. He's been with the Adroit for quite a long time. And Mehmet Tanner, Ottawa-based geologist, is our QP for this particular property. So, in conclusion, I hope you've learned something today about antimony, why the British Geological Survey and others think that it is probably one of the most at-risk elements that we have, and I hope you've learned something about Adroit and learning and mining in Italy. Thank you.